of AAEE New South Wales, the New South Wales chapter of our association. I've been an environmental educator for many years and am loving that many of my peers here are here today. Thank you. Together with you all, we can help create the sustainable future we want. Just letting you know, we are recording, so if you don't want to be part of the video for our future use, please just turn your video off. I'd now like to ask our guest speaker, Josh Gilbert, to give us a welcome to country.
Thanks, Sue. G'day, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Firstly, it's been a few years since I connected with a lot of you on the call, so it's great to be back. I just want to start by acknowledging country. I'm here on Worimi country, which is on the mid-north coast, here in a place called Gloucester, which is very much home for me. It's where my dad's family have the first recorded birth in the mountains, in the caves around the town in which we live. Gloucester is also a men's site, so it's important for me to recognize the lands here. And actually the mountain range just out to my side here is where boys would start their transition to manhood. And I think that's a important aspect that we think about what that looks like in today's society and the restrictions upon that, I guess, not only due to climate change, but due to new life and new society. So well, I want to acknowledge my elders, past, present here on Worimi country, and to all the countries in which you're all joining from. When we welcome people to our country here, we say Gathe Niran, let us go together. And I always think that that's an important place for us to start, that we are on this journey together and we're all in this, doing the work that's needed every day to help enable culture, enable life and new meaning in this ancient landscape. So thanks for having me and welcome, I guess, from me.
Thanks, Josh. We'd like to acknowledge our context, the context within which we gather today. We meet at a time when the human species is having an unprecedented impact on the planet. We do this at the beginning of this gathering as a reminder that the discussions we have here, the decisions we make, and any actions we take as a result will have consequences for other people and other species, both those living now as well as future generations. This is our first climate catch-up, a way to support environmental educators and activists working on our biggest environmental education issue facing our future, climate change. The first half of our catch-up is focused on the UN Climate Conference. Why so much of COP26 is going to be about climate justice, and why climate justice is so important for our Pacific region and our future. We are thrilled to have two special guests today. Josh Gilbert, thanks Josh, who we've heard from already, who is a First Nations climate reality leader, and Lousi, a Pacific Islands climate reality leader and Tongan NGO delegate to COP26. So looking forward to hearing from you, Uili. We are looking forward to learning from Josh and Uili's perspective on what climate justice is and why it is so important. After this deep dive into the big issues, the second half of today will be about us, connecting in small groups to reflect and share our thoughts on all of this. But just a bit of an update from A2E New South Wales on our climate change initiatives. Communicating about climate change is the most important thing we can all do. But as the biggest threat to our very existence, it can be a hard topic to discuss. Because A2E New South Wales has been communicating and engaging with communities about our environment since 1976 or so, we feel we are well placed to support you to do this critical work. This is why in 2019, when we declared a climate emergency, we've been shifting our focus. And this year, we adopted a climate emergency response plan. I'd like to spend a few minutes with you to share what this plan is. This is the first time we are sharing our climate emergency response. So we'd really like to value if you want to share your thoughts on this plan using the chat function. And it's so lovely to also hear where everybody's from and what country you're on. So use the chat function. Erica, is now going to put up the slide. Thanks, Erica. All right, our climate emergency response. All of A2E business activities and decision making will now address the climate emergency. We will support and collaborate with environmental educators and climate advocates to communicate a hopeful and inspiring vision of the regenerative future our global community can create. Our goals are to support and learn with our members and networks to help them communicate, to help their communities believe it is worth doing something, and we are mobilised to act. Acknowledge our climate grief with fortitude and hope, to focus upon our climate emergency plan. Support our First Nations climate justice movement and learn from their insights and approach to healing by listening and valuing their sharing of knowledge. Collaborate with our partners and create new alliances to increase the scale and pace of our own and others' climate emergency responses. Seek new collaborations with community, industry, non-government, government organisations to share our resources, skills and networks for climate action. Lead with courage and humility and use our voice and leadership to grow New South Wales and Australia's climate emergency response. Heal by acting on our climate emergency plan collectively and restore our well-being through our connection with nature. We join the millions of people around our planet who are working to prevent dangerous climate change and regenerate the natural systems on which all life depends. We draw hope and optimism from knowing that we are part of this global community who care and are taking action to rapidly reduce greenhouse gas emissions and draw down carbon from our atmosphere. We will enact our climate emergency response by implementing the actions in the Australian Association for Environmental Education New South Wales Chapter Emergency Response Plan. It's a long title, isn't it? If our climate emergency response aligns with your ambitions, please get in touch with me, and my email will be in the chat, but it's exec@a2e2newsouthwales.org.au. So very willing to be collaborative in how we get this climate emergency response happening. By working together with courage, we can increase Australia's ambition to solve the climate emergency. I'd now like to introduce our first guest speaker, Josh Gilbert. Josh has worked with us at A2E before, so we're so thrilled that you could come back and join with us, Josh. Josh is a Worimi man, farmer, academic, and climate and environmental advocate. He was named Australia Geographic's Young Conservationist of the Year, shot a documentary with Al Gore's Climate Reality Project, and was Young Australian of the Year finalist. He is currently the current Indigenous co-chair of Reconciliation New South Wales and is on the boards of KU Children's Services and the Aboriginal Housing Office. He is also the ambassador for Bridging the Gap Foundation and Young Farmers Connect. If you have any questions for Josh, please put them into the chat, as we will have a short Q&A session at the end of the presentations. Over to you, Josh.
Thanks, Sue. G'day, everyone. So great to be with you again. And just for me, just want to do a bit of a sense check. It's lunchtime on a Friday, so if you can just give me like a thumbs up or a smiley face or something like that to tell me how you're going, how your day's going. If it's not going so good, maybe try and find another reaction that might show that. But yeah, good to see a lot of smiling faces and quite a few thumbs up. So it's great to be with you all, and I'm just hoping that your days go well. It's a beautiful day here on Worimi country. It was a bit fresh this morning and foggy, but the sun's come out, and I'm hoping we get a bit more rain for the seed I've just put in our farm and to keep this country going here on Worimi country. As Sue mentioned, I have had a bit of a yarn with A2E once before, and really it's a pleasure of mine to be back. I've actually taken a lot more of an educational focus, Sue, since the last time I had a chat, and it really is my pleasure, I guess, to be on the board for both KU and the Indigenous Chair of Reconciliation New South Wales. And I saw a few friendly KU faces and names on the call before, so hey you mob, and good for you to be here, and thank you for all the work you do with our services and making sure that this conversation's front and foremost right across New South Wales. So yeah, it really is a pleasure for me to be here. And what I've learned most, probably over the last 3 or 4 years since my last presentation, is that educators are pivotal in teaching young kids that around the environment, around cultural diversity, Indigenous culture, and I also do a fair bit of work in the Indigenous agriculture space. And I think it's important that we start connecting a few dots as we go forward. And really, I guess for me, educators are so vital in making sure that messaging goes out, that it resonates, that it connects, and that really it opens up young people's minds and old people's minds too, because there's a lot of those that need some shifting. That this is a journey, and we filmed a conversation for Kuru Curriculum a few weeks ago, and one of the things that resonated with me while we were doing that is this need to like keep picking up bits and pieces as you're going and keeping that journey going as we go along. And it's all those little bits, all those dots that you pick up to create that artwork in your own futures that are going to matter. It's also more and more obvious to me that we need to start addressing some of the huge climate issues that we're facing in society. So just here in Gloucester, if I paint a brief background as to what we've experienced here, we had one of the worst droughts that I think certainly anyone in living memory has ever faced here. And, you know, fortunately, my grandparents are still around, and speaking to my grandfather about how bad that drought was, it's a bit sobering. And, you know, it certainly hit our farm pretty hard. I think it certainly hit our town, and it certainly hit the country. And, you know, you can see country trying to revive from that. And I think shows its testament, but shows that this new environment, this new world that we're going to face is going to continue to challenge both it or her and us. So we've gone from drought. We also had fires in this area, and a lot of the country just north of me was under pretty bad fire threat. And it was important, I think, for me, what came out of that was a resilient community. We saw firefighters coming together and community making food parcels and helping out their neighbors beyond anything else that we've seen here. And for me, that was quite powerful to see how all that could come together in the face of fire. Just because our environment's struggling a bit, and the impacts of climate change keep impacting our country here. We also had a flood, and the river just down that way towards the mountains flooded quite heavily. And what I learned from that, with water going through most of our shop fronts and some of our houses in town, is that there was a huge opportunity for community to come together, that we could come together in a way that I'd never seen before. So the older football guys were getting the younger football guys who were going to the pub and saying, you're not having a beer until you shovel at least 100 sandbags. We kind of broke every police rule you could think of in terms of vehicles to make sure we put out tons and tons of sandbags right across the town. So for me, I just think that resilience, that ability for us to come together is really powerful when we talk about environment and climate change, because often we focus on the impact but don't necessarily attribute that to what we get left with, and that opportunity to bond and come together. So I had to have a quick yarn about climate justice, and really for me, climate justice for our mob, for Indigenous mob, really is communicating climate change in a way that recognizes the intersection of our culture and the societal status, I guess, of what we are as people. So we know that our mob often struggle, that they're on the front lines of climate change, and that they're going to be more impacted and more disproportionately impacted by climate change as we move forward. And we need to consider that in the light that not only are we struggling due to climate change and other factors, but we also have lost a lot of our country for our ability to connect to culture. And I'm studying Indigenous agriculture at the moment, and I heard this quote, and the KU team will recognize this from last weekend, but it was a quote that I thought resonated for this, that the electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. And it kind of makes me think that when we continue thinking about Indigenous culture as static, we're going to keep thinking about it around how we can just continuously improve and protect what we've got, without realizing that our culture, us as people, have developed over the last 200 years. And that our knowledge around climate change, that we, as the only living population who have dealt with climate change before, we need to recognize that that has adapted and changed as well, and that we can read the landscape in today's world almost as good as what we had been able to 60,000 years ago. We know all the different changes that are coming. We know how the environment's going to keep moving. And it's only through Indigenous knowledge that we have the easiest way out because of climate change. So when we think about climate justice, we need to actually unravel our perceptions of what Indigenous identity and culture is. You weren't expecting a light-skinned Aboriginal person here from Rurimi country probably joining you today to speak about climate justice. And it's just a testament that us as people, our knowledge and our ability has emerged through Western society, and the strategic decisions that our ancestors made to keep us thriving and living as Aboriginal people on this country. So with that in mind, I just want you to think about what this means to you, how you can approach different mob on the countries that you're from. Certainly check out Q&A last night with young sister Millie Telford, who did an awesome job. A quick little plug for Reconciliation New South Wales. Check out the work that we're doing. But really, this is my invitation for you to connect with your local mob and listen. Embrace their stories. Think about how they connect with country, and think about how you can weave that through the educational process that you embark on every day. Thank you.
Oh, Josh, thanks so much for those wise words. And yep, Reconciliation New South Wales should be the top of where we as organisations are partnering with. So thanks so much, Josh. And we will get a chance to ask questions after we've heard from Uili. So it's now my pleasure to introduce our second guest speaker, Lousi. Apologies, Uili. Uili is joining us from the Kingdom of Tonga, where he is the president of the NGO Hoa Tonga. OHAI Tonga is dedicated to addressing climate change in Tonga and the Pacific. Uili will also be the sole Tongan delegate at COP26, representing NGOs. Over to you, Uili.
So, I'm not too sure where to start. It's quite moving to be able to sit here in a space that we call as our home. But knowingly, with the science speaks for itself, that I'm part of the problems. And we're all part of the problems, if I may success at that. But in somehow, we are coming in as part of the major solution for our children's and also for our children's children. As I reach my 50s, I realize how life is so short. And I wish that I had more time. But knowingly, which is something that I would acknowledge, why education are so important, especially for climate change and also for climate justice. I'm not really towards climate justice, because for me, climate justice is the impact of what we all do, but especially on the other side of the world. As we all know, if if 1.5, we're not going to meet that sooner or later, and if we do increase that, there will be no Pacific Islands. Will become history, will be underwater. No matter how much we tried, as much as we wish for, and I'm hoping otherwise. Hope is a wonderful thing, but realization that we have to come together as we are interconnected beings. As everyone else's actions, it's counted. If we are able to see it through, how much you guys work in Australia will determine the future of the Kingdom of Tonga. And I wish you well for what you will propose, what you're actively going to transform, what we will be representing, the voices of the children of Australia. It will determine the histories of our children and our grandchildren as well. And so they are specific. As His Majesty mentioning that on 2019 at the United Nations when he delivered his royal speech, somehow we are byproducts of someone else's action. Which is someone else's action, but we receive the actual consequences of that action. So for me personally, if I could make success at something that I will carry with me to the COP26, is keep doing what you're doing. I move for what you was, my previous guest speaker, talk about his generation and also the next generation as well. And we needed many people like you, Josh, to be able to come out and being able to utilize your energies, you're able with educations. As we all know, perceptions will change the world through over a period of time, but I'm hoping that we can do that with urgency. As I was in Ketowice in 2018, Sir David Attenborough, this is his words. It takes billions of years to create that blue world, or the blue Pacific, or the blue oceans, or the blue planet where we have today. But it's only take the last 350 years with the industrial world, and it's us as human. We are part of it. So I believe strongly that we all can do this together. As the former Vice President, Al Gore, state clearly, our voices matters. And I really mean that, it matters. Whatever way we're going to present it, if we present it as my colleague and one of our great scholars and sociologists of the Pacific, Professor Abel Offer mentioned this is one of my favorite quotes. We are small islands in the big vast ocean. And the 7 oceans does not separated us. It's united us all. And it's always Mahaloa Pito with all my wishes to the COP26 and my pathways, and thank you for the climate reality, for enabling this journey for myself as a history to be at the COP26 and raise that statement in the highest level on a platform that I can speak with the world leaders. Sia ora tua whātua, Malo.
Oh, Willie, thank you for your wise words too. And we stand with you. We stand with you, and we will be on your shoulders as you fight for that 1.5 in Glasgow. So just please know that we are there with you. So thank you. And we will have an opportunity to ask Willie some questions. But moving on, I'm now going to invite Erica Van Schillebeck to share with us a presentation about the Blue Pacific to Glasgow that Willie mentioned, that Blue Pacific that has been developed by the Climate Reality Program here in the Australian Pacific. Erica is a member of our A2E2 New South Wales Executive Committee and has been leading our climate working group since 2019. And like me, she has been trained under the former US Vice President Al Gore as a global climate reality leader. Over to you, Erica.
Thanks, Sue. I'll just bring this slideshow up. And thank you to Willie and Joshua. All right, have you got that slide up now?
I think we can see all of them, Erica.
Okay. Have you got the slide now? What?
We've got it. If you click swap displays at the top, it might switch it around.
How is that?
Perfect.
Great. Thanks, guys. Technology is always a little bit fun. So the new IPCC report released in August signifies a code red for humanity. If we fail to act urgently on climate change, there will be catastrophic global consequences. And we're already nearing irreversible climate tipping points. We have less than 1 decade to make massive reductions in global greenhouse gas emissions. And if we don't, we will likely see global heating above 1.5 degrees and higher in our lifetimes. But we do have time to change course and prevent the worst of the climate crisis. This is why what we do in the next 21 days matters, because until the very last night of the United Nations upcoming climate conference, we can use our voices to call for more ambitious action. In fact, it was only on the last night of COP25 in Paris 2015 that the world shifted from 2 degrees and agreed to a more ambitious target of 1.5 degrees. And this was due to the efforts of the Pacific Island leaders, who reminded the world of what is at stake with every fraction of a degree. The United Nations Conference of Parties, COP26, is crucial if runaway climate change is to be brought under control, and it may be the world's last best chance to do this. Our region has a deeply important role in the global context, and our community and neighbours are calling for a united voice across Australia, New Zealand, and the Pacific Island countries. We need to advance the ocean agenda at COP26. Our oceans provide and regulate our rainwater, our drinking water, weather, climate, coastlines, 15% of our food, and even the oxygen in the air that we breathe. It's our oceans that have absorbed so much of the extra heat in the atmosphere due to global warming. And because of this, it's our oceans that are the hottest on record. And it's these higher ocean temperatures that supercharge extreme weather events and degrade coral reefs and ecosystems that are critical for our food security and our oxygen production. Two of these most recent super cyclones that have impacted our Pacific region include Cyclone Harold in Vanuatu, where winds of 235 kilometres per hour displaced 80,000 people. And Category 5 Cyclone Yaza in Fiji led to the loss of life, affected 139,000 people and resulted in a $500 million damage bill. In some areas, such as the Torres Strait, sandbags are the only thing that protect homes from high tides and from flooding due to the sea level rise from climate change. As Josh and Uili have shared with us, climate justice is about taking an ethical perspective on the causes as well as the social and environmental impacts of climate change. Awareness of the historical responsibilities for climate change helps us to understand and act on the challenges faced by those people and places who are most vulnerable to its impacts. Pacific Island countries that depend on the ocean for their livelihoods and culture are facing some of the most severe climate impacts of anywhere on Earth. Yet they are only responsible for 0.23% of global emissions. And as the IPCC's landmark research report has shown, global heating above 1.5 degrees will be catastrophic for Pacific Island countries and will lead to the loss of entire countries within this century. And Kiribati is the first nation to begin to move its people because of climate change. The world has already heated by 1.1 degrees and is currently on track for warming of 3.9 degrees this century unless countries ramp up their commitments substantially. This is why steep emissions cuts of 50% this decade are crucial to avoid missing the 1.5 degree target and safeguard a livable climate. Our commitments, though, currently fall precariously short, and our current global targets will only lead to a 1% reduction in emissions by 2030. New Zealand, Fiji, Nauru and the Marshall Islands have committed to net zero by 2050. And the most obvious exception in the Pacific is us, Australia. Hopefully we'll get there in the next couple of days. The other commitment that our developed countries and nations need to deliver is climate finance to support developing countries to build low carbon economies and adapt to the impacts of climate change. This was agreed to at Paris, where 18 donor states, including Australia, committed to US $100 billion a year. But we still have a long way to go because the OECD estimated that at best, $78.9 billion was mobilised in 2018. But unfortunately, about 3/4 of this money is in the form of loans rather than grants. And this is a problem for poorer countries already in debt. So at Glasgow, we need redoubled action. All countries must put forward ambitious targets and plans. We also need ambitious 2030 targets of at least 50% reduction in emissions by Australia and New Zealand and all countries in the developed world. And we need climate finance and climate justice. Developed countries, such as us, need to make good on our promise to developing nations. Now is the critical time for us to engage with our federal politicians, to give them the courage to move towards a net zero economy full of nature-based solutions so that we can have a cleaner, better, fairer, and a regenerative future. We have everything we need to solve the climate crisis. We have the knowledge, the science, and the money to reach the 2030 and 2050 targets and to honour our climate finance commitments. The only thing that will stop us is lack of will and leadership. So please, in the next 21 days, use your voice and use your care for people and our planet to make a difference at COP26. Email and phone your federal MP and our Prime Minister and use a personal approach to ask them to set ambitious targets and commit to climate finance. And amplify your voice. Be brave and let your friends and family and networks know what you are doing and ask if they would consider doing the same. We all know people who care about their community or the environment, and your encouragement and tips will give them the courage to do so. Thanks. Thank you, Sue.
Thanks, Erica. Just a great call to action that's coming from A2E2 and the climate reality. And now I'm going to hand over to Andrew Snedden, our wonderful partnerships officer at A2E2 New South Wales. Thank you, Andrew, who is also a climate reality leader and is a climate for change facilitator. So thank you, Andrew.
Thanks, Sue. Yeah, it's been so wonderful to join A2E2 New South Wales recently this year. And yeah, so wonderful to be part of this climate movement that A2E2 is moving on. We're running a little bit behind time, so I might just ask a couple of questions of our two guest speakers. And then we want to, after that, move into some breakout rooms for everyone to just take a bit of a breath and connect a little bit. So Josh, I might come to you first, if that's all right. You spoke you came up with probably one of my newest favorite phrases, that electric light did not come from the continuous improvement of candles. I've written that down and I'll use that forevermore. But you also spoke about resilient community. And to me, that's one of the key things that we can all be working towards, and something that will have such a powerful impact on the climate emergency. How can people on the call start building resilience in their own local communities?
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing like an emergency to bring everyone together, unfortunately. But for me, I think it's the little things that often go unnoticed in communities, particularly rural and regional towns, that add up to big change. And it's that social fabric that we need to continue to work on. So the example I provided before around the football team, I would have never believed that would have happened before without seeing it at that event or during that time. And I think it's all those relationships that get built, the ability for people to know each other and those skill sets, and just be able to communicate with people in a really open and transparent way. So it's all the day-to-day things for me that's really powerful, and all of that adds up. And I think what I've learned during COVID is that it's the ability for us to care for others that's going to keep our communities and our society going. And it's the same for climate change, that without that compassion, without that wonderful story that Uili shared before, and really hearing that and connecting with that and sharing that with others, and being just a good human, I guess, that need for us to come together as a social society and connect and collaborate and share, all of that is powerful, and that's how we get change. So locally, I think just interweaving that every day, and just saying g'day to other people down the street and having a yarn, and all those little things that just build up over time and make that powerful change when we need it most.
Yeah, thanks, Josh. Yeah, you mentioned COVID there, and I've just seen so many parallels between the crisis that we faced with the pandemic and with the climate emergency. I don't know how many times at the start of the pandemic we heard that we're all in this together. And I think the exact same thing applies to the climate emergency. And it's only in coming together that we can move through this. Thanks, Josh. And Uili, coming to you, thank you so much for sharing your story. Every time I hear you speak, my heart breaks, and then I also just get goosebumps as I'm filled with inspiration from the work that you do, and I just saw so much love coming through for you in the chat as well. So thank you for sharing. I wanted to ask you, how do you personally deal with the scale and the impact of the climate emergency while continuing to educate and inspire people like you do?
Amazing questions. For me personally, it's kindness. Pretty much having kindness not only for human beings, but also for the animals and also for the butterflies, the birds, you know, the insects. I live in the bush, and I always encouraging the people who come and assist me physically to make sure when they're finishing having a coconut drink, they have to split up the coconuts for all the other things that we cannot see. And I noticed very strongly how butterfly loves coconuts, love fruits as well. And because we're involved of building up an international cemetery for bees, I learned so much. Not from, I mean, I've been well educated in many levels, philosophies and so much. Very blessed to be Tongan and be, you know, to be traveling around the world as well and being engaging on this. But for the last, this time I've been in Tonga now for 5 months. I got locked down in the United States during the COVID-19 for over a year and 2 weeks. Before I transitioned back into Tonga, it took me 2 months to get able to come out when I quarantined here in Tonga, via New Zealand. So I learned so much about everything else in my short amount of time. But for me personally, if I encourage what we are doing, to be able to remember it, that everyone has a story. And whatever their stories, one of my great friends in New Zealand has always said, everyone has a stories, and their stories matters as well, no matter what, our beliefs and also where we stand united too. They have a stories. But what matters for me is what we can able to do. And one of the things I always know, at the end of the day, great will with great intentions is always going to come up at the top. And few people, they can do that. But imagine if many of us can stand united all together. So what I was sharing earlier before about the ocean is everything for me. And also so is the Pacific too. And so is the people who we stand together as well. How matters of the Pacific Ocean. And this COP here, I just wanted to remind it, this COP here is devoted to the Blue Pacific, to the Pacific Ocean. That's what matters very much. I was in 2015 in Paris as a global activist, flew out of New York. I was walking, and a million walks when they were racing the walk in New York. So seeing how we all come together, and I'm really, really encouraging all of us, if we can be able to look in each other's eyes, somehow we can be connected. And somehow, like Henry Bunner mentioning it as well, his words, if we can be able to stand, and then, you know, all the studies that shows everything, it's just the action we needed now. So if I can say my last word for this, please, please, your action matters, and it can be able to be it can be has an impact on someone else's life. So
thanks, Uili.
Plant some trees as well, and that's my last word. Plant some trees too, because it will help us all. Malo.
Beautiful. Thanks, Uili. I'll throw back to Sue and we can jump into some breakout rooms.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrew, and thanks for sharing more of yourselves. That is what we do as environmental educators. So thank you everyone for your time of reflecting and connecting. So this is just our wrap-up section, and do know that some of you need to get back to lunch, off your lunch hour, and we do thank everyone for participating. But just to share with you, COP26 call to action, do contact your federal MPs and the Prime Minister. And also, we've put up some links there to our A2E2 Climate Resource Hub with lots of amazing resources, and to the Climate Reality fact sheets from the Blue Pacific to Glasgow. And there's a really lovely one there on climate justice that I'd encourage you to get. So just to finish off, we'd love you to put a message in the chat of one thing that, of one short and sweet message of why you care, and how we can gather them up to make a difference. So what is it, the one thing that's bubbling up with you from our climate catch-up today? And we do hope that this is the beginning of our a journey of having lunchtime catch-ups with you. We also want to encourage you to take up the opportunity to take the tips to change the climate story and be a climate leader during your day job. And it is a wonderful resource for you to get some ideas on how to communicate with others on climate change. And again, it's in our Climate Resources Hub. So thank you for joining us today. And so again, just put that final word in the chat. And when you leave, we'll have a poll, and just to get you to think about how to communicate climate change to your communities. So thanks everyone, and we'll be here just for the next few minutes just to read that chat. But do know many have to go off to lunch, from lunch. So thank you everyone.